I want to say a couple of things which I think might be a bit helpful. The first may or may not surprise you. We actually, in Canada today, have a very dysfunctional political system. I don't know historically of a time when this country has had a more dysfunctional one. And that is because what happened in 1993 effectively ended a political system that had gone on even longer than the country itself, which is two sort of multifaceted brokerage parties who managed government one after the other, the sort of ins and the outs, accompanied by smaller parties that came from a special perspective, whether that was the Social Credit or the CCF or the NDP. They added the kind of extra spark that existed. But up until 1993, we had two parties. There was the Liberal Party and the Progressive Conservative Party. And not to weary you with all the historical details, something happened in the 93 election which is without precedent. And I think we should just think about it for 1 second. Up until 1993, these two national parties, who, by the way, were not all that different, just in case anybody's wondering here. I remember, this is one of my best sort of insights into this. Not too long after I first got elected, Mitchell Sharp, I think, was the Minister of Finance at the time. He and I happened to be at a small lunch together. He was sitting opposite me. And Mitch kind of leaned across the table and he said, "How's it going, young fella?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Sharp, it's been a kind of interesting experience." He said, "Haven't you found out yet that the differences within your party are greater than the differences between our two parties?" And the light went on. The light went on. Now, it is true that these parties were not monolithic, and they tended to move one way or the other out of the center. But as most good political science professors will tell you, that up until 1993, the secret of being in government was to get sort of close to the center. For the Liberals, at least over the course of the 20th century, it was mostly moving a little bit maybe from the left, but mostly in the center. For the Conservatives, moving a little bit from the right towards the center. And so in 1957, after many years in the wilderness, when John Diefenbaker became leader of the party, he was sufficiently kind of progressive looking that a whole bunch of people were torn loose from their political moorings, and suddenly Diefenbaker won the largest majority that any party had ever won as a progressive conservative. And I won't go too far on this. I simply want to make the point that that process from Sir John A. MacDonald right through to Brian Mulroney was the way in which politics operated until 1993. Now again, and not to spend too much time on it, you know the kind of low regard that Brian Mulroney had by the time he left office in early 1993. And briefly, Kim Campbell came in to succeed him as Prime Minister, and then the roof fell in. The Progressive Conservative Party, which was the government of Canada for the previous 8 or 9 years, went from 172 seats down to 2. That's right. Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne. I mean, can you just think about it? People must have thought, watching it from outside, what's going on in that country? Now, perhaps the other thing that was missed was it wasn't as if there weren't other people to take its place, because suddenly we had two brand new phenomena. We had a nationalist separatist party in the bloc, which actually, and this is even more hilarious, they became the official opposition with Lucien Bouchard. A party that was committed to breaking up Canada was actually Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And then we had this other group, the Reform Party, with almost the same number of seats, that eventually, over the course of the next decade, morphed into what was left of the Progressive Conservative Party to create the now present Conservative Party. The Conservative Party today is not the party of the Progressive Conservatives, as I keep trying to tell any of my friends who ask me. It is a party which has a very clear ideological base. That's what keeps them in power. The Liberal Party, while it still is in theory a national party, is now so broken up and balkanized that we now likely don't have a national party, period. So we need to have some more sophisticated understanding of a country that's going through some kind of political travail. Where this is going to take us over the course of the next few years, I have no idea. I'm not much of a prognosticator in knowing where things are going to go. I do know that it's quite dysfunctional. We've had now three minority parliaments in a row that mostly have not functioned as minorities because they haven't operated with the kind of reciprocity that most minorities have. I sat in a number of minorities. I sat in the 65 one, I sat in the 72 one, I sat in the, what was the other one? 79 one, and then another, I think. Anyway, enough to know that minorities can work really well. In fact, I said up until the last few years that the best parliament for this country is a minority parliament. But that was based on a totally different structure of political support, which no longer exists. We now have a regionalized, ideological kind of politics in an old-fashioned voting system. We have one of the oldest voting systems in the world, which is the first past the post, which is highly destructive in terms of making politically credible decisions. So what I'm going to offer is a little bit of sort of practical advice. Individually, we can't do much about this, though I do think citizens need to be more active in trying to envision a much better political system, because the country deserves better than it has right now. It deserves a way better. One thing I know for sure, and I'm going to jump from that kind of analysis to something very specific, is that members of parliament still try to represent their district in responsible ways. Some are better than others for obvious reasons. If you decide that you have issues that you want to raise, don't waste your time. This is very direct, going to Ottawa, because you will just be one of a long series of people who shuttle through various committee rooms or MPs' offices. The place to meet a member of parliament is where they live, in their constituencies and in their offices. I have experienced both as a member of parliament and as a lobbyist going to see them, that if I wanted to have a significant discussion with a political person, it was to meet them in their home base, for two reasons. First of all, that's the most important thing to any elected person. And secondly, the chances are pretty good that the people who are coming in their office actually live in their riding and either vote for them or vote against them. And there's always that option. So that's the first thing. Contact elected people where they live. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're taking the time and trouble to arrange a meeting, don't just go all by yourself. Because my experience is if somebody wanders in the door, they have a meeting you want to have, well, you listen to them, you're respectful of them, but as the old saying goes, who do they represent? If you, on the other hand, say, there are a number of us in this riding who feel deeply and strongly about this issue, and we want to meet with you in your office, whether it's 6 people, a dozen people, or if it's so many people that you can't get into the office, then arrange for that elected person to come to a larger place, a larger hall. That's the second thing. And the third thing I would say is, if you take the time and trouble to sit down with your MP, to lay out for them the issues that you're concerned about, make it crystal clear. This is not the first and last conversation, but the beginning of a continuing conversation and dialogue in which you respect that person and they respect you. Because if you say, here is what I want you to think about, then the next question is, and when can we talk again? When can you tell us what you think you might be able to do about this? Because if that person knows that you're serious, that you yourself are committed, that you're not going away, that is really important. Too much energy and time is wasted on that brief period of time after the writ is dropped and an election takes place, about 35 days. It is the least useful time to talk to any person running for elective office, believe you me. Because you know what that person is trying to do? I know from my own experience in 9 elections, is you're out knocking on doors. You're trying to shake as many hands, kiss as many babies, do whatever it is to be out there with the folks who ultimately are going to be going to the polls. You're not going to spend your time in an office for 2 hours with 3 people when you could be out meeting 100 people in the same amount of time. It makes no sense. Plus the fact, as you've likely noticed, elections are more and more controlled events. In the sense that policy issues have been set, the opportunity, the wiggle room that you can somehow, maneuver a person at a elective level into taking a position contrary to what most of their party or what the leader of the party is saying is highly unlikely in the extreme. So those are the three things I'll leave with you. I hope they're helpful, but I know one thing, don't lose sight of the bigger picture, because if we do, we will simply be, repeating the kind of problems that we've already experienced for the past few years.